Hi, my name's Sarah Reilly, and I am the Research Director for the Women's Research Centre, which is based at the Documentary Media Centre in Leicester. For International Women's Day and also for Women's History Month, we are interviewing and having a chat with various women who have particular interests and specialties. And for this one, we are going to speak to Dr Anne Graefer, who is a researcher and also the founder of GenderIQ, who provide training, workshop, lectures and advice on all aspects of gender, diversity and inclusion. So Anne, could you first of all kick off and tell us a bit more about yourself and about your organisation?
Hello, I'm Anne. I'm very happy to be here today, feeling very honored. I have been teaching and researching in the UK for about 10 years. I have been teaching at various universities in gender studies and media studies. And in 2018, I moved back to Germany thanks to Brexit and other things. And when I came back, the first thing that really struck me was when I walked out of my apartment and I saw like a poster that was super sexist. And after living in the UK for so long, I was really shocked. I was like, how is this still hanging around in 2018? And then I looked deeper into the issues of diversity and inclusion that we have in Germany. And then I decided, why not try to help organizations and institutions and companies to help them with their diversity and inclusion strategy. And then I founded GenderIQ, which is kind of a loose network of people with different fields of expertise. And depending on the project, we go there and we try to help with workshops, training or coaching.
Fantastic. That sounds great, actually. And sort of when you're saying that you've seen sort of quite a difference, that you're very shocked by certain aspects of when you came back to Germany. Can you just give us a bit more of an idea about that? Was that just sort of generally? And obviously, I know you do a lot of work within the workplace for a lot of people, and the sort of changing gender roles and such forth. So yeah, so what sort of things really stood out to you?
I think, like I said, like the media representations, particularly in advertising in this case, that were like the first thing that really struck me, especially since in the UK there was this discussion about, not the discussion, the fact that gender stereotypical images, are not allowed anymore. And then you come back, and so I flagged this up and raised my concerns towards some people, and they said, why are you so unrelaxed about this? We oppose this, we are very open, this is just, beautiful to look at. And I was really surprised about this attitude. I was surprised that there's no public discourse around it, that there's like, don't get me wrong, of course there's feminism and various feminist movements, but in the part where I live in Germany, which is Bavaria, which is quite conservative as such, nobody really seemed to, have an issue with that. And when I continued like talking about it and women realized that I'm open to that, they always told me stories about their workplace. And I was really surprised about the way in which people communicate here. So there was no concept about microaggressions or how you should use certain words, not in the workplace or not in general, and particularly not in the workplace. So that was really something that struck me, that there was no or very little consideration about like how we communicate, and women were kind of, viewed to slot in and to fit in to this kind of scheme. That was something that I thought was really different from my experience in the UK.
Okay, and sort of within that working environment, have you also, I know we have a lot of discussion here about the structures of work, particularly under the COVID, everything that's happened. I think it's really sort of brought into quite stark relief how the whole structure of work can be very discriminatory against women and very inflexible. And it can also really impact like career progression and such forth. So how have you found the actual structure of work, like when you've gone into these organizations and looked at things?
I think what is a little bit different between the UK and Germany might be that in the UK you have still these structures, but there's also discussion about it.
Oh.
In Germany, we had less discussion about it. I mean, we passed some laws, very recently one law that really requires more women in leadership roles, especially on the board. Yet there was for a long time this kind of idea that there is a meritocracy, and everyone who works well and who works really hard and is talented will, thanks to their talent, somehow, go beyond these structures and will be successful. And there is, by now, at least the companies that I'm working with, there is an awareness that these structures are not a plain play field, so that there are differences for men and women. But I have to say that the change is really slow, because these structures, they have built for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And people also have like quite of a vast interest in keeping things as they are. So, it's not very popular to change things. And what I found particularly upsetting, I have to say in some respect, is that when you work with startups, for instance, where you think they're all about disruption and innovation and doing things differently, that oftentimes they're actually quite hardcore in the structures. Like particularly, they don't have many bonuses at place to provide for minorities or for women to help them at the workplace. They are quite structured around like the white man in sneakers, and what they find fun and what they find appealing, and this kind of binge working and this giving you everything. And you always have to wonder, well, for whom is this possible to give everything? Like, this person must be completely free of care labor, completely, able to completely healthy, no health issues whatsoever. So actually, who you're having in mind is like a particular person, a particular point in their lifetime, but this is not a solution for many people.
That's true. I think that's definitely true, that you can sort of see across many countries. I don't think that's purely just based in Germany. Is that kind of indirect discrimination, and the sort of roles and types of employment that women predominantly tend to fall into are often sort of lower paid or on a part-time basis, and I think that can really kind of impact career progression, and it can also kind of really I think a lot of work isn't seen as being comparable. I mean, obviously we've had like it here, some really like some of the major cases over the years about women who were, say, in local authorities were having certain employment, but they were being paid less than a man in a comparable role, maybe in a slightly different industry. And that was like a really kind of quite a big kind of body of cases and legislation that went through, and then how else that impacted things, and also then it's sort of all the small things that are kind of linked to that, such as workplace pensions, how women often have much lower pensions because they haven't had the number of years to pay in, or they've kind of missed out on certain schemes and everything. So I think often it is that kind of the insidious discrimination that on the like indirect, that on the face of it you don't really necessarily recognize, but actually kind of has a major impact with women, definitely.
No,
So with sorry, go on, love. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. I just said I can agree.
No, that's grand. But then also just sort of I was doing sort of some reading actually on the sort of the gender pay gap. I mean, I know that in Germany, I saw that it's actually fallen below 20% for the first time in 2019, which is great. But obviously in the UK, we very much have kind of quite a big gender pay gap as well. And I think to do with the part-time employment, often that kind of skews the figures, because more women work in part-time, that kind of increases the pay gap and everything. You don't get those sort of levels of progression. I mean, sort of I suppose actually with the sort of, I suppose it depends on how much depth you go into with the work that you do when you go into organizations. I mean, are you given carte blanche to kind of go in and look at those sort of other sort of policies and structures, or do you tend to find sometimes they just want you to come and kind of tidy everything up and make it all look nice without kind of giving any real change underneath that?
So most of the time, like what we do is really the more broader awareness training as such.
Okay.
And you can see that there's always a lot of, there is really a need to talk about all these issues and to bring them up, and people feel relieved that at least they can say them. So it's very often that we work with leadership teams, and they are often already quite advanced in this sense. And now they finally realize, like, you know, that there are more people in the room who think like that. So sometimes this really is quite good from a psychological point of view, that they can see, okay, we really want to change something, and I'm not the only one who thinks like that. And especially when there are loads of men in these workshops, it's always good to have like allies who really understand the problem behind it. But there are also companies who give insights into their structures, and they really understand that to actually change something, you really need to work on the structure of the organization and on the processes. And then we look, you know, at particular moments in which it could help. Like, is there a particular problem with women who return after maternity break? In Germany, it's a bit weird. You can go on maternity leave even for up to 3 years, yet the company doesn't have to provide you the same exact job. They have to provide you a similar one. So that, you know, it can happen sometimes that people come back and they are in a comparable position, but it's not their position. And they don't feel very welcome about that, obviously. And sometimes then they leave and they decide to rather do something else or stay at home. And it's also the fact that we still have this traditional, most of the time, most families, at least most heteronormative families, they work like that women work in part-time jobs, and the man is the breadwinner, or even that one of them stays at home, and that's very often the woman who stays at home. So there is a dependency on the side of the women on the man, so simply to survive, to be honest.
I think that's sort of definitely something that we can sort of see in the UK, and again in many other countries. I know there's been a lot of research in America and everything on that as well. But I think COVID has really kind of highlighted again a lot of these issues. There's been a lot of women are talking about how the childcare and homeschooling has very much kind of fallen on themselves, and they've had to do the predominant amount of like being the teacher at home whilst also trying to balance a full or a part-time job. And I think a lot of women kind of have had children based on the calculation that, you know, my children will go to school during these ages, and therefore I can balance like my work and being a mother and other aspects of my life. And then when something comes along that kind of tears through all of that, then that really kind of, again, you think everything is kind of equal, when actually, if you scratch the surface, a lot of those sort of structures are still very much in place. And I know actually, sort of when you were talking about pregnancy, I know actually there's been some research in the UK. It's a House of Commons paper sort of talking about how 1 in 4 pregnant women and mums have had unfair treatment or discrimination at work, and they've actually been singled out for redundancy or being pressured into going on to furlough or to delaying the time that they're coming back with furlough as well. So I do think often it's sort of really kind of highlighted a lot of those sort of major issues sort of through COVID. It'll be quite interesting to see kind of how the dust settles once we're kind of through everything to do with that, definitely on the other side. So
So in Germany, for instance, we were following quite closely how this plays out within families, and most of the time it's like heterosexual families that they were looking at. But they were following really closely how this plays out, and we have a lot of data about it. And it became really apparent that in families where there was like an equal share before the pandemic, they also had this equal share of care labor, and work during the pandemic. Yet all the families where the women were more involved in care labor than the men, it totally shifted. And now these women shoulder really nearly everything of the care labor.
Oh, wow.
In comparison to men. So here it really led to a retraditionalization of the gender roles, if you want to talk like that. As I said, families who had a different model beforehand, they were able to keep that up. But everyone who was like a slight of equal, yet the woman still did more in the house, that completely changed, and now it completely shifted to the women.
And I know that I've also sort of heard of quite a lot of women who have actually had to make the decision during this time that they can't juggle everything, and they're finding it too difficult, and they're having to make the choice between trying to continue in employment, or if they're actually going to have to step away from the labour market for the moment, just to kind of come through. And I think that's really sad, because you know, those sort of that we still have those sort of inequalities within society, and it is sort of such a key issue that so many sort of have to face, definitely. But also, I don't know, I think maybe in some ways it's sort of a lot of the areas that women are employed in. I think also it's going to after sort of during COVID, a lot of the jobs that are going, like such as in retail and like as in sort of cafes and coffee stores, a lot of things that definitely were a lot more kind of higher percentage of women in. A lot of those are where the redundancies are going to happen. So you do kind of wonder, does that mean that we're going to see a kind of sort of these gender roles firmed up even more, if the man in his traditional sort of job and traditional role gets to keep on being the breadwinner, whilst the sort of the obviously we're talking about sort of very sort of heterosexual relationships with this, but it's going to be interesting to see, is this actually going to kind of set equality back for kind of quite a long time to come? And that's sort of a really quite a scary thought, I have to say, going forward.
Yeah, I think like in Germany, at least, there are really some feminist voices who say that this is definitely going to be the case, and that the damage that is done at the moment will really, like, it will put us back like decades, right? And it's not that we really have been in the forefront to start with. So this is really a problem. And on the other hand, when you break it down to individual families, they just have to make it work, right? Like they have to calculate what is the best solution for them. And but again, it leads us back to the question of structure and policies, because in Germany, we have a tax law that is really quite brutal, and it comes from the 50s, and it has been they tried to overrule it a few times, but surprisingly, it didn't work. It's called Ehegattensplitting, and that means that you can save a lot of tax if one person in your household is earning a lot and the other person is earning very little, because then they basically take the median from it, and from that they calculate your tax. So for many people, financially, it looks like it doesn't make sense that both earn a lot or that they both earn equal. Like one solution to the problem would be that both work part-time, yet it doesn't, first of all, there aren't enough part-time positions for that, especially not if you want to further your career. And secondly, from a tax point of view, it doesn't make sense. So that was really an initiative that held women back, because traditionally it was then the woman who stepped back and who earned less. And yes, it makes sense in the first moment. But if there's a divorce, they changed that law, then a man do not have to pay for a women alimony all the time, only as long as the kids are in school or, you know, at university. After that, it stops. So what happened was, like, all these families that lived in these very traditional structures, and that they still live in these structures, if it came to a divorce later in life, sometimes very wealthy women found themselves in poverty all of a sudden because nobody was responsible to pay for them, yet they didn't have a huge income. So even though it made sense to calculate like that when they were married, it's a complete different picture after divorce.
Wow, that's really interesting, because I know kind of in the UK there's been quite a lot of sort of very famous kind of legal cases over the years to do with the rights of women after divorce. And because traditionally you may well find the man had the house in their name and the woman stayed at home and didn't sort of put sort of money towards the cost of the house. So in theory, the man was sort of felt he could keep it all because he'd paid for it all. And a lot of then there was some really sort of, I said, quite a lot of really fundamental cases, and a very famous judge called Lord Denning, and he kind of said that the actual role of the woman within the home is a job, basically, and she has contributed to that marriage as much as a man has. It's just not in kind of pounds and pence, it's instead in all the other ways, and therefore they should kind of have equal rights to the house, and to have kind of themselves sort of getting the alimony and sort of maintenance afterwards, because they'd kind of put their life aside for the sake of the marriage and the home. And so I do find it kind of quite surprising that actually kind of in the 21st century that in Germany they still have sort of something that's sort of kind of quite regressive in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you think the actual main law to do with the tax, why has that been stopped? Has there been any particular, what are the arguments that people have been using against that?
You mean, what are the arguments that it hasn't been stopped, the Ehegatten
Yeah,
splitting?
exactly. What sort of, you said that they've tried to kind of get rid of it a few times, but it's not happened. Why is that?
It's because we have more men in parliament than women. We have 70% men and 30% women. Luckily, the conservative parties don't have too many women, but it is really that. It's a huge,
Is it really?
it's a gender problem. Yeah.
Wow.
And I think if we'd had more women in parliament, this would have been overruled a long time ago. But
Really?
this way, like, I don't know, we have this idea of Germany that we are quite good with gender equality because we have a female chancellor since 15 years and Ursula von der Leyen in the EU and all that. But the truth of the matter is that this is really, that gives a false impression.
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking, because I know there was there's sort of been controversy in the UK when like a male parliamentarian has kind of vetoed something that is like for the benefit of women, like the upskirting video recording and everything, that was kind of vetoed because of a single man who objected to it kind of going through Parliament. And I suppose that you do hope that even though again in the UK the vast majority of MPs are male, but they have still passed certain laws. But that's kind of also, obviously all these men have like mothers, they probably have like wives, kids and such forth, daughters. I mean, I do find that quite shocking that kind of they can't see that bigger picture just because they can't get past their male privilege really and recognize it's not just about them, it's about a wider society and where you kind of want your kind of country to stand and to go in the future. And it is just really, it's very kind of shocking really that they don't kind of see that. Particularly, I mean, obviously with the theme for International Women's Day is choose to challenge, and is about challenging those sort of gender kind of inequalities and I suppose that there's only so much lobbying you can do, but you do really, I don't know, I find it very disappointing that they can't kind of consider their role in wider society and moving forward for society, really.
Yeah, I don't know. I think when you were talking about where they all have mothers and sisters and daughters, I don't know, but there's always this argument, right, that this is oftentimes used by men to
True.
actually protect themselves from doing something. They're like, I have a daughter too. So, but in the end of the day, I don't know. I think that has a lot to do with like really who has the power to make laws and who has the power to challenge them, really. And I don't think that it is really, now it changed a little bit. I mean, we just passed a law that women, like we had a law how many women have to be in a supervisory board, for instance. And we saw that came into power in 2016. And we have seen a steady increase since then. And it has done companies really good, because now they get pressured sometimes into doing training and, you know, thinking in these directions, challenging the norm. But just in the beginning of this year, we finally have a quota for women on the board of executives. That means, I think, I don't even know exactly how that is, but I think if you have 3 out of 3 people, one have to be a woman. And if the state has any skin in the company, then even with 2 people, one has to be a woman. And this is a huge game changer. Yet a lot of people critique it. They say, so what happens to companies if they don't do that? And yeah, the question is, what happens to these companies? They just have to claim why they didn't do it. They have to give a reason. Mm-hmm. And yet still, this quota hopefully has a really strong impact, because for Germany, that's really a fantastic step. Like they have been working on that for so long, and you know, with this kind of ratio in the government, it's really, really difficult. It was a very difficult law to pass. So even though it's not like, you know, as strict as we could hope for, I hope that it will change really a little bit. But then on the other hand, we also have to say, and that is a complete different discussion, but can the purpose be that we push all women into a full-time employment and working 40 hours a week and then outsourcing anything that has to do with care labor? So I think like this is something that could have been happened during COVID, that we have a conversation about care labor and how important it is, and how we disrespected it for all the time, even people who work at it professionally or at home. But this discussion never happened. In the beginning in Germany, it looked like it, but then that didn't really happen.
Well, that's disappointing, because I think, yeah, the caregiver and the childcare aspect is really important. But I suppose, yeah, looking at the whole kind of the accessibility of work. I mean, obviously, as I have a disability, I'm very passionate about kind of the flexible working and to very much kind of employ and have people based on their talent and not necessarily on their deficiencies if they can't fit a certain role. But I suppose ultimately in very sort of in so many areas of society, people kind of don't really sort of take that into account. And I suppose also, yeah, it's just even just looking at the sort of certain aspects of childcare, like I think I was reading a study about women who were sort of hoping to head back into work kind of after the COVID, and so after COVID, basically, once everything starts to open up a little bit more. But a lot of the actual sort of childcare providers in the UK were already underfunded before the sort of COVID came along, and now kind of quite a lot of them are in quite a lot of financial sort of difficulties, and it's something like a third of the women hoping to go back haven't yet been able to find childcare. But then also like sort of other aspects linked to the fundamentals of needing the childcare to work, and how that kind of I suppose there's also kind of within that, like in the UK, people say, yes, but we can provide so many hours of free childcare for women and such forth, when actually the way the system's set up, it also can it really penalises women who are on a lower income or have to use universal credit. Like there's just been a case that's found it was sort of just unlawful, I suppose you could say, because with universal credit, you have to kind of put up front your first childcare payment, and for a lot of sort of people, male or female, to find like a significant chunk of money to pay that first sort of bill and to then get it reimbursed is sort of beyond them. And I suppose is that, even though we in theory have this very kind of inclusive law with that, is it again linking back to those who make the laws not quite understanding what it is like to be a person in that situation, and to sort of have to kind of find these try and find these ways around to enable them to return to work and kind of being not just a mother and everything with that. Definitely.
I like that, how you said that, of them not quite understanding how to do that. That's a good way. Like, that's really a good way to frame it. I never thought about that. Thank you for that. That's good.
Well, I think sometimes though as well, people just need to step outside their box as well. I think as humans, we're kind of very it's very easy just to sort of think of me and my and not seeing beyond your kind of immediate radius, when actually I like to presume that across society, and it's with the choose to challenge as well, isn't it? You've got to be an ally for people, and again, it's fine to sort of have your sticker, but actually you've got to kind of walk the walk as well as talk the talk with a lot of these things. Definitely.
No,
So,
absolutely. It's just that I tend to always presume, like, maybe it's attribution bias, that that they simply do not want to, whereas you said, well, maybe they do not understand. And this is really true, because it's unbelievable as well when you work with clients, like how, when you are privileged, how easy it is to really consider this the normal, and to think that this is for everyone on this planet normality, and this is the standard on which we should function and make rules. So sometimes I think it really, you're right, it has something to do with like understanding the different challenges.
That's true. So when you're having these hard discussions, how would you kind of try and broach this issue? What would you recommend to people or to organizations?
You mean how they can shift their perspective?
Well, yes, actually, yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good, about I realized I just kind of two questions there. So yes, I apologize.
Don't worry. I think like it is a slow process, and it is a habit. So in the sense that this shift of perspective that will happen for some people who undergo a training or who try to learn, and it won't happen for other people because simply they are not in a point in their life where they where they're able to conceive that, and they really do not understand where the problem is and what I'm talking about. But those people who are really like interested in it, and it's quite interesting, I found out that it's people who are really like, they don't even have to be in any way a social scientist or in this area. They can come from all sorts of fields. If they are interested in it, then they always see how it, even though it's about other people, how it relates back to them, and how, and it sounds really cheesy, but how we actually would all win if things would change.
Yeah.
Because I train a lot of like white men in suits or white men in sneakers. And the thing is that they would benefit from a different view on masculinity as well, and what is expected of them. And things are changing at the moment at such rapid speed, not necessarily for the better, but the point is that the pressure, like, it gets, more people feel it than before. Things are changing quite drastically. So I think a shift of perspective is always possible when you can see, okay, maybe there's an alternative. Like, maybe what we have is not the only way, and it's not normality, and it's not right, and it's really unfair. And when you can see that there's an alternative, or that there's even, you can imagine an alternative, I think that's quite inspirational for some people, even though I would be careful to say that, it has a fantastic effect on people immediately. I consider my work much more like planting a seed, like giving some impulse, and then really I have no control how that plays out and how that works.
That's true. And I suppose also you hope if they then have a look at how they regard one aspect, like how they regard the women in the workplace, then sort of how they'll kind of hopefully look at other areas in society, other minority groups, and sort of consider, well, how do I feel about them? Kind of, again, with me, disability is always kind of like the thing I'm particularly kind of quite passionate about. And like you do kind of hope that there's also those unintended kind of consequences as well, like flexible working being predominantly for what people see as mothers, when actually, again, for disabled people, it's very plus. But I think you just need to always question everything. I think a lot of the major ills in society are caused by people who don't question the status quo and question, why is it like this? Should it be like this? And I think that's really important. But I suppose it depends on if those who make the decisions actually think like that, and maybe it's partly generational. I mean, I do think I think now you hope that the sort of generations coming up actually do question these things a lot more and won't kind of accept a lot of the status quo. But obviously that kind of that's a hope, and hopefully that will happen. And I suppose with you, how do you find it between, I know you say that you have a lot of issues between the new startup, which is by a younger generation, and probably the more traditional sort of traditional companies. Are you kind of sort of starting to see change, or do you, I know we still have a long way to go, but how are you finding
I actually see a change in me, because I thought, and I really, by all means, I cannot speak for many startups, but the little that I know is really that they are under so much pressure. They are under so much pressure because they basically have to build what generations before them had years to build. Like, now that needs to be productive and efficient, and you need to raise money, and you need to employ people. It's such speed that it's really it puts them under enormous pressure. And we all know what happens under pressure, what happens under stress. We fall back into old patterns, and that's not necessarily a good way to go about. As I say, I'm not speaking for all startups by all means, but I learned to see advantages of traditional companies like Mittelstand in Germany, because they have, like, when we talk about work-life balance and stuff like that, this is where people leave on a Friday afternoon, or where they shut down the bank for everyone to have lunch, and everyone has lunch at the same time, so it's just closed. We shut the door. This is just one very simple example. I actually changed my view on that quite a bit, I have to say, because we talk about flexibilization in a positive light, and it has many positives. Yet on the other hand, flexibilization also means to be available all the time, to be productive at all hours. And when you have these strong structures that say, no, now we are on lunch break, Mahlzeit, then everyone is out, it's shut. On Friday, you should leave at a certain point, because otherwise it's confusing. The systems shut down. And this is really just a very tiny example to show how, yes, they might not be very agile, and they might not be, you know, they definitely have their problems, but I think there's also a lot of good things that are still at place there, which might be worth a second look and maybe learning from them again.
No, that's definitely, I suppose, yeah, I've never thought of it that way. Thank you very much as well. That's definitely something to have a think about and to ponder over. I suppose don't dismiss the traditional sort of companies or traditional way of doing things, when actually that might kind of give, as you said, like true equality in some ways. But yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Well, thank you also for kind of joining us and for giving your time to talk about yourself and your work. You can contact Dr. Anne Graefer on her website, which is GenderIQ.de. I'll put some links up on our blog and everything. But yeah, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.